is Big Man Tyrone, and you're about to watch the MtG Cabal cast with your hosts, Woad, Thirsty, and Reptar. Sub to us on all your podcast networks at MtG Cabal Cast and YouTube.
Alrighty, guys, welcome to the newest episode of the Cabalcast Quarantine Edition, as we are both quarantined with COVID. This one, we're in the midst of spoiler season, so we're going to take a look at what that means. This is obviously a little bit different since we've been in spoiler season for 20 months now-ish, something like that.
Yep.
And basically how these set releases impact things. And this is something we touched on a little bit ago, but that was before we came to the conclusion that, yes, this is just the reality. We are in a 24/7, 365 spoiler season because of how many releases we get now and how that affects prices, buy lists, etc. So with that, let's get started.
Yep. This is the spoiler season that never ends, and this is a topic kind of born on that. As you mentioned, the idea of spoilers and leaks affecting buy price and sell price is definitely something we've touched on before, but we've never really gone in depth because now we're kind of looking at something that is a little more anomalous. So for me as a vendor, this is where I'm going to take a look at, my daily hot sheets, so to speak. And I'm going to see in the morning as a specialist or maybe as a category leader, wherever I'm working, what happened the night before. Give me the rundown. Give me yesterday and the past week, and let's take a look at things. And this is where things get really interesting, especially with Kamigawa, because we know what mechanics belong in Kamigawa. So this isn't a reprint set, which means things are a little more familiar than they would be with something like New Capernia, which is coming out. And we go back and say, okay, what could possibly, of all the terrible keywords that were in Kamigawa, be upcycled? And there are a handful of them. So we started thinking back in October. Chicago Style Gaming called out like, hey, get on your ninjutsu, your bushido, all these other cards now before they start going up in price, when people realize like there's money to be made here for people that are homers for the theme. And that's kind of what we looked at and what we started seeing recently, and what really sparked the idea like now is the proper time. And why is that? It's because I mentioned there are so many terrible keywords in Kamigawa that people are just attacking them. And the easiest one to point out is bushido, and what this is doing to a lot of cards overall. Something like Isao Enlightened Bushi, let me bring up the stocks graph real quick, went from bulk to dollars in this. And if I'm a vendor and I see this, am I going to change anything? So here's what the stocks graph looked like. This card was dead. This card is dead. And then all of a sudden, we can see, 3 weeks ago, it just spikes and carries on. We've reset the floor on this. And this is the story not just for Isao. It's the story for Konda, Lord of Iganjo. It's the story for Kentaro, the Smiling Cat. Every card with Bushido. The Samurais traced this. We have some ninjas we'll talk about that did the same thing. So what does this mean for vendors of all levels? From my standpoint as a large vendor, I'm going to take a look and I'm going to see this sale stuff. I'm like, cool, we moved some bulk. I now have room. This is anomalous data, and I'm going to treat it as such. I might adjust our sales price depending on what the rest of the industry is doing, and I know my cost of goods, and this is really important. If my cost of goods says this card's bulk, then I'm just going to run it. Get them gone. And then what I'll do is I'll have my specialists or my category leaders go back and look at the last 30 days of sales. I'll pause buy list on this.
Yeah,
for sure. My buy list number will stay dirt.
Yep.
And I'll eat whatever happens on the internet while this goes on. And I'll say, look, we have an anomaly here. What does sales look like historically? And if we see movement over time on something like this, then yeah, we'll increase the buy list because we're going to churn these. But if the sales is as dead as that graph, that price graph I showed for Isao, nothing, man. I'm not updating anything. And you know who didn't? Card Kingdom didn't. This is Card Kingdom's buy price on Kentaro, $3.20. They're buying 20. Like, that's a real number, but that buy price isn't real, quote unquote, according to stocks. This card was, as of last week, I think, close to 20. It was 12 and on its way up. It increased over 200%. Right? What else do I have up? Conda. This used to be decent in EDH. $4.50 for 23. That's what they're buying right now.
Yep.
$25 market price. Card Kingdom sees this as anomalous data, and this is what I'm talking about from a large vendor standpoint. So for me, this doesn't really impact unless historically we've moved some in drips and drabs. But if things are as dead as this looks like, then it's not really going to impact me at the vendor level. At an LGS, this might be different.
So the interesting thing about at the LGS level, when we had this at Moonbase, one of the things that we were big on was, we don't make money by chasing spikes. We make money by making our margin. So at the end of the day, at the beginning of the day, we would take a look at the orders and see what came in. All right, we sold all of our Isao and Light and Bushis. What's actually going on with this card? Oh, it spiked? Okay, fine. In that case, we may go to our bulk and re-pick some of it.
Okay.
And I think that's something that even as a backpacker is pretty common. Is like, all right, I've got this, set sorted bulk. Let me go see if I've got any Sao and Light and Bushis that I can just throw up on TCG Player, or check Card Kingdom. See if they have a real buy number on it that's above my cost of goods.
Mm-hmm.
Because then I don't have to pay anybody to do anything except ship it.
Yeah.
And that's the end. And I think that's one of the things, especially as a backpacker, that gets lost a lot is, bulk can be your friend during times like this if you put in the time and energy to sort it. And I personally think it's worth it to do that because, one, I like my stuff organized,
yeah.
And two, stuff like this happens. Like Flash became $100 card overnight one time.
Another two examples where we're thinking of this, talking about the LGS and digging out bulk: Devoted Druid and Postmortem Lunge.
Yep.
They didn't hit in the same deck. I think they were different things.
Yeah.
But it's just that you're sitting on all this bulk from Shadow War and New Phyrexia because some of these cards are just nuts.
Yeah. And then it happens, and all right, now I'm going to go back and look at my bulk. And the interesting, the reason for that compared to the bigger vendor is the bigger vendor, whatever, who cares? The LGS is a little more hand-to-mouth, and you may have some downtime that you don't necessarily have when you're running on the scale of a Troll and Toad or Star City Games. So, you know what? I got, 15, 20 minutes. I can go dig through some bulk real quick, maybe pull out $10. That's worth 10 to 15 minutes of work. To me, I would think.
Yeah.
And I think that's, when this stuff happens as the LGS, the other thing is, all right, do you prepare for it? Do you say, you know what, Kamigawa's coming out. I know Bushido. I know Ninjutsu, like all this stuff. Do we want to go through and pick some bulk to maybe pull these cards out? Because we're going to get people asking for throat slitters to make a ninja deck again. Because of course ninjas will be back.
Yep.
And I think that's the kind of thing that good LGSs tend to do with those 10 to 15 minutes of downtime that they have periodically, is go back and pick through that bulk, try to see if there's some opportunity there. It's not necessarily something you do every set because, New Capernia, for example, we know nothing about what's coming there. But when we're revisiting, it's super easy, as we mentioned before, to go back to the last time we ran whatever plane and say, all right, what potential value is there hidden in this box that I can find? And I think that's the biggest opportunity for these types of sets for an LGS.
Yeah, to go back and look through. Obviously, you're not going to keep everything. There's a lot of draft chaff all over the place. But there were playable cards that are conveniently still playable. Anything that wasn't then, most likely, is not now. It did not get any better over time. Kamigawa and some other sets did not age like a fine wine. They age like a terrible cheese.
Yes.
And I think the idea of going back to look at your bulk is important actually at all levels. There's no way that no large vendor does not just have a backstock of bulk to go comb through, because when you do your bulk buys, especially if you've been listening to the Star City podcast network, they've been advertising if you have over 500,000 cards, they'll come to you.
Yep.
You know what they're not going to go through? The absolute bulk of that. All these cards that we just mentioned that were, their bulk on the buy list, that would maybe be quarters on TCG Player. They're probably just sitting somewhere in a bulk rare 5K or a stack of them. And you know what? Now it's probably, like you said, worth the time to go back. For them, it's going to be easier because the larger scale, they have people to do that. You don't have to find those spare minutes. But yes, super duper important. And I think some of this also speaks to, like, some of these things did get reprinted in supplemental products. Ink Eyes was in FTV 20 and 2 Plane Chase sets. Anthologies kind of counts, kind of doesn't. So it's like, all right, if that was a popular card then, and it has nothing to do with the subtype Rat, everything to do with Ninja and the rest of the card, if they're putting it in this interesting supplemental product, do we hold on to it for later to upcycle? I think that's kind of a through line here. A lot of this stuff, not so much. Bushido and Rampage are very similar keywords, and you know what? They're both bad.
Yeah. Flanking, reverse Bushido, also bad.
Yeah, that's like pennies into dimes if you can, and yeah, you buy list them overall. I don't think it's a feel bad moment for people to think about, like, oh, I ditched all this stuff for money at some point, because if the graph is flat, if it's quarters, just take if it's quarters on TCG Player, take your 5 or 10 cents when you can. Like, if you move this stuff when bulk rares were 10 cents each, like, I'd be happy about it. Overall, I think stuff like this is fine and less impactful for the vendors than people think, because, like you said, even at the vendor level, you don't hunt those spikes. You want to find your arbitrage opportunity and just ride out what you have. Like, and if it's on-prem, it may or may not be, then dedicate the resources to it. Otherwise, kind of like, F it.
Yeah.
Like, I think the biggest like set stuff and leaks that I've known to actually impact vendors at any level has just been Yu-Gi-Oh stuff, because Yu-Gi-Oh, the game is so interesting overall, where all the cards are playable until they're not. They're banned. And that changes the context of the game entirely. And so spoilers and leaks ripple through everything. It's not just like standard or like maybe modern if you're lucky. It's like, no, one set could change the entire course of the game.
I'll never forget, I believe it was one of the Texas GPs. It was right before A25 spoilers leaked. And I've told the story on the podcast before. The email got leaked across vendors on the floor. Channel Fireball is spoiling Ensnaring Bridge, Rishadan Port, and Imperial Recruiter this weekend.
Yep.
Or on Monday. So Sunday, all of the vendors that had purchased those cards throughout the weekend dumped them to Channel Fireball because Channel Fireball had them hot listed going into the event. They're beholden to that number.
Yeah.
So the only time that you'll see like this huge change in Magic, I feel like the way you do in like a Yu-Gi-Oh and a Pokemon when leaks happen, is when you have a master set and you get a card that hasn't been printed in a while, where you have $50 mana crypts, and all of a sudden, 3 months later they're back to 150, but that's not nearly the same beast that it is in those other games. And I think it's one of the important things to parse when you see these spikes happen as spoilers get released is what cards are real and what cards aren't. You touched on Isao not being real. Well, as you and I talked about before we went live, Sakashima's Student is very real.
Yes.
And seeing a spike. And that card has seen play in EDH. It's been printed 1.5 times, I guess, if you count Plane Chase Anthology as a set. And sees a ton of utility play in EDH, and that's why you're seeing this spike that's seemingly real on this card. Like, this is an actual number. We've been sitting at $20 forever, and then all of a sudden we start trickling up to like 30 to 40, and then boom, spike hits.
Yep.
And I think that's, as with any other season, spoilers, whatever, trying to figure out what cards are real and what cards aren't. I think it was Yuriko was an example we came up with prior to this. That's an example of like, here's just a ninja that's not like a rat, it's just a ninja. Mm-hmm. So you can't go with like the Ink Eyes, well, it's a ninja as well, and a rat, tribal commander, whatever. No, this actually, we're seeing a real price trend on this card, in addition to the Judge promo, which is still on an upward trajectory with no signs of retracing.
Yeah.
And I think that's, as the bigger vendor, as the LGS, you count on your specialist for that.
Mm-hmm.
That's where you defer to your specialist and say, look, you pay attention to this vertical, what's real? Should we be like, I have this Yuriko sitting in the case that's been here for 3 months for $30. Do I want to move it up to 50 or what? Because now there's eyes on this card that there weren't before.
Yeah, Yuriko is interesting. I actually have, I didn't tell you before the cast, I have an anecdotal story about Yuriko. So before we left for the holidays, we were just cruising through the mall with one of the LGSs, and I saw the etched Commander Legends foil in the case. And this is at a time where I wasn't sure if prices were going to stick on a lot of this. We'd seen the Bushido movement, we hadn't seen the Ninja movement, and I was like, the price in the case was pretty sweet. As far as I knew, it was like about where the non-foil set version was at the time, because I kept eyes on it. I'm like, I don't want to pay for a foil. I've already had to deal with Commander Legends Pringles. I don't want to have to undo another one if this one comes out of the case and looks like that. So I passed on it, and then, we're 2 weeks after that, and it's doubled in price. It was just a card I didn't think was going to hold, so I didn't just snap it off at 15. Now it's 30 plus on the open market. And it's because it didn't really do much beforehand. We're in the middle of this, you could kind of predict today's Bushido. In 2 or 3 days, it's going to be the next keyword, repeat. And we were headed towards the next keyword. I'm like, I don't want to be beholden to something that doesn't see a lot of play. If we don't get a lot of Ninja support, this is just going to be dead air in my binder because I'm not selling anything right now. I don't want to be holding the bag on this, but somebody at the LGS, to your point, was savvy enough to say, hey, if people are moving on Kamigawa stuff, let's dig out anything that's relevant to our EDH players and throw it out there. And this was a card that had not been in the case previously, because I go to this joint Saturdays and Mondays. Like, I've got it down.
Okay.
Thursdays and Fridays are Magic Nights. Sunday is like all day Commander.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
So when are they going to change? When are they going to have new stock in the case from people that come in and trade? Saturday and Monday.
Yep.
And I whiffed on. Yeah. I just whiffed on Yuriko, and I'm okay with it. I'm fine missing them here and there. And I think something that's also important is I didn't have an out for this card. I'm not, like I said, I'm not I'm not vending right now, and I don't have a buy list order coming up. So I'm just going to sit on it. And if it falls, then I'm quote unquote stuck with it. But as an LGS, as a vendor, as somebody who wants to interact and take part of this, again, as we harp on, you got to know your outs. As a large vendor, your outs is to your audience. That's why you're not really chasing these spikes unless they look real. You have that sales data to prove, hey, it is real. At the LGS level, you mentioned you can go pick your bulk, pull out $10, and just straight arbitrage it to somebody and not worry about what's going to happen in the case when people are buying for real numbers. Even if it is Card Kingdom moving this price up from $1 to $4, that's still money you didn't have.
Yep. And it's still worth, I think, you touching on having an out is very important, because especially, like, obviously as a large vendor, you don't care. Like, you have such a captive audience and such a good market capture that, all right, I'm going to throw it up and somebody's going to buy it. But when you're sitting as a backpacker, and this is something that I feel like a lot of backpackers get into the mentality of chasing spikes. And look, if you feel like it's going to spike, don't overpay unless you have the out. Mm-hmm. You have to have the out. If you don't, you're screwed. And you don't want to get caught holding the bag on a bunch of Yurikos that you spent $20 on when you could have gotten, a couple of fetch lands out of that instead that will move.
Yep.
Because that's, again, we all get bright shining, that's kind of the MTG finance feedback loop is, what great card did you see beforehand? What did you see ahead of time was going to spike? Make sure, even as you're doing this, you have your outs lined up. And similar to the LGS situation I was describing when we go through and pick our bulk. All right, are we just going to buy list it to Card Kingdom for more than we should, or are we actually going to try to sell this ourselves? What makes more sense? Make sure you're being mindful of that as you're going after these things. When you see the cards start to spike, you're probably too late to buy in profitably after you account for time and everything else, because you take a look at Conda. In a matter of 2 weeks, the card's back to almost its old floor. So you pack in shipping delays and everything else with the holidays, all of a sudden you may be caught holding the bag on a condo you paid $15 for, and now it's selling for 10, and you're just out of luck.
Yep. No, absolutely. There's always the timing factor to be involved here, and it's the ecosystem. That's important. If you're following these and you're saying, okay, is this real or not, and you give it time and you watch the vendor update happen where they raise the buy price a little bit, they raise the quantity a little bit, one or the other, or they don't, and it's days into this, and the sales price is continuing to raise, then that tells you everything you need to know about the historics on this card, and that it's just not moving. They've done their due diligence. They've looked at the sales. They've looked at the the anomaly reporting that they have, and determined that it is not worth their time to increase on-prem quantity. They're not going to open up the buy list for it, and I think that's super important because that's the top of the chain. That's the top of the food chain here. Large vendors like this will tell you when we do these revisit sets, and we get leaks and spoilers that confirm keywords or characters, yada yada, that movement is either real or fake.
Yeah.
Because the open market is open to everybody and everything, and it is easy to trigger FOMO there, but difficult to trigger it at the vendor level and make them respond appropriately when they have the historics on it.
Yeah. And I think that's, one of the key things there is having access to that data. And as a big guy, you've got that.
Yep.
You have all your own analytics, everything else going. Just rely on your community as the local guy. Hey, look, you know what? This LGS has a bunch of EDH players. Maybe I'll go show up and play EDH and pick their brains about cool stuff from Kamigawa that they're looking forward to. Use the resources that you have available to you because it really is important, and it will save you a lot of time and money.
Yep.
And I think a lot of people just don't really get into that necessarily. It's super important to do that. And I just wish more people understood that.
Yep, absolutely. I think that's really the nice end cap for that. So, picks?
Let's do it.
Right,
you went first last week. I'm going first.
Right, you got it.
All right, so it's the end of the year. What does that mean? A bunch of year-in review content. And my personal favorite is always CEDH. So what's been going on in the last year in CEDH? Top 10 cards, etc. All of that is incredibly popular right now. So my pick is based on that. And it is Cody Vociferous Codex Set Foil. If you take a look at the stocks graph, this card's a turd. It's awful. There is no price trajectory on this whatsoever. And that's fine. I'm totally okay with that. The interesting thing, and I think we may see a similar trajectory, is if you look at Caustic Caterpillar foils from Origins, from the time Origin released until 2018, it's 2 years, foil was dirt. Absolute garbage dirt. 2018 hits. All of a sudden we see kind of an explosion in the popularity of CEDH. Price explodes. Granted, that's a foil common. Cody is a foil rare. I'm going for set foil because it's the cheapest special version, I guess you would say. Mm-hmm. And I think that it is going to be probably a 1 to 2 year timeline. Maybe less. We'll see if we get paper events again. SCG Con did announce the first 3 tour dates. Maybe we see Channel Fireball do something with Magic as well. NRG just postponed an event because of Omicron, so we'll see how that goes. But timeline-wise, I think you're looking at about probably a year to 2, so I wouldn't go super deep on this card. This card is universally regarded as the most impactful CEDH card of the last year. It's one of the fastest win cons in the format. It goes in Spells Matter decks. It goes in anything looking to combo off, almost as Ad Naz number 2.
Okay.
Or Demonic Consultation number 2, or whatever instant you win off of number 2. Also, it works great in Hermit Druid piles, which criminally underrated because Hermit Druid is basically a glass cannon. Once they remove your Hermit Druid, you're dead. You kind of get an extra Druid in this. Worth mentioning. Mm-hmm. So I just think it's a really solid, basically bulk foil pickup.
Yep.
You know what? Dump $5 in it. Get 20 of them. Sit on it for a while and see what happens. We're back to slumlording it. Back where I thrive, baby.
You're not up from the 36 chamber. You're just up from the gutter.
Yeah, exactly.
I like this card. It does so much that Sunbird's Invocation can't. Like go in a 5. Like go in a 5-color deck.
Yeah.
You could play Sunbirds there, but it's also your general, which makes it much more difficult to deal with. Like, there's so many words on this card. It definitely suffers from can't be bad syndrome.
Yeah.
And so I like that overall. I think EDH rec data is pretty low on it because it does, I don't want to say too much, but it does too much restricting for the standard EDH rec crowd. You can't cast permanent spells. That's the first sentence on the card. And I think that's a turnoff for a number of casual players, unless it just becomes super easy. Maybe that's the wrong word. Unless it becomes more palatable to combo off with this card. Or if your ability to fizzle is greater than your consistency.
Yeah.
Like, then I think it becomes more palatable, and thus it'll hit wreck and push it a lot. Otherwise, as a CEDH card, it absolutely makes sense. I've got a bunch of the full art version of this card, non-foil, I picked up on set release because I thought it would be doing something already for similar reasons, but I just, nobody was really backing it. It was difficult to kind of defend without somebody with a galaxy brain to give me the deets on it. So I'm glad people are finally looking at this card and pushing it. I think it's just been under the radar for too long as something that might be a little too nebulous to work with, a little too restrictive to work with, or a little too consistent to work with for the EDH rec crowd.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. It's the kind of thing that it's not going to show up on rec because CEDH doesn't really exist on rec. But when you look at the CEDH subreddit and the CEDH discords, this card's all over the place now.
Yeah.
It's just exploding, and I think it's going to be one of those things that, when paper events happen and people start, going out to the Star City command zone and seeing a million people with these incredibly great foiled out, tricked out decks, all of a sudden you're like, this is great. I want to do that too. Sign me up.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. I think that flash appeal is definitely something that's going to pick up for Cody. So for my pick, I'm going to go back to the last couple of weeks of Gods, and I'm sticking with a tribal theme in Patriarch's Bidding.
Oh, yeah.
Nice curveball.
This card's way too cheap.
Yeah, the MH2 version, and now it's time.
Yeah.
So Patriarch's Bidding, super concise. 3 double black sorcery. Each player chooses a creature type. Each player returns all creature cards of a type chosen this way from their graveyard to the battlefield. And then the game ends, is the hidden text on the card. So obviously this is tribal matters, but it's not necessarily just, I have this in quotes here, combat matters finish, as a large number of tribal decks can close out with a combo once the correct pieces are on the board, which is what this does. Slivers, goblins, zombies, I'm pretty sure. I think humans and merfolk might be the only 2 tribes that don't have enough ETB effects to literally just blat the board with damage or life drain or something like that. And as far as this card is concerned, I just have this listed as RTFC. It does exactly what it says it does. This is only for decks looking to close the game with a tribe. Even tribal Tomer from the MTG Goldfish Commander series plays that. It's all shapeshifters. This goes in there. Yeah. The longer the game lives, meaning Magic, the better cards like Bidding become as the pieces within the tribe refine and get better over time. So, if you want to see what I'm talking about, go look at Zombies prior to original Innistrad block and let me know how good they look. Sometimes it's adding new colors to the tribe by way of new commanders, growing their power level by letting them extend into Bidding or otherwise. And as
Omnath.
Yep. Vampires, they were primarily black. Zombies got blue. Humans got all the other colors that aren't white. Goblins eventually got black, though there is the rare blue-red goblin.
Or red-green. Thank you, Scarwood Goblins.
Yep. Elves got black over time. Although they were tapping for black prior to it. You couldn't cast them for black. And so there are a myriad of ways to win the game with various tribes. Bidding represents an endgame scenario whereby you can win the turn you cast it, or, like I said, shortly thereafter. And, like, yeah, this is unilateral, but the thing is, unless you're at the table with other tribal decks that are doing the exact same thing, it doesn't really freaking matter. Like, you're fine. And if it really does matter, you're in black. You got everything from Bojuka Bog to Tormod's Crypt, Nihil Spellbomb, and Withered Wretch. You're fine. So the utility... It's the utility and a reason to support that put a spotlight on bidding, where previously it might have been quote-unquote too pricey or quote-unquote too combo-centric for most players, and that would report back to EDH Rec and not flag their decks as expensive. Because bidding, we're looking at the MH2 version, which is a whole $2. Prior to this, it was only an Onslaught and some World Champ stuff, and it was going on, it spiked to like $40. It was pretty much cruising at the high 20s to like low 30s, which is a little pricey, and like I said, flags a deck as expensive on EDH Rec. Moreover, this point is the fact that we just came out of Midnight Hunt and the next Innistrad set. Like, so we have like werewolves. You can't jund it up yet with werewolves. I don't think you have that, Commander. We just got additional vampire support. Super sweet. We're moving into Kamigawa. We thought we might get ninjas. Guess what? We have Dimir ninjas. We have rats. Like, cool. These are all black cards that play into that. New Copernicus is kind of like thuggish plane. Do we get demons and vampires? Who knows? Zombies, maybe. It all plays into bidding. We keep getting tribal cards. Tribal synergies keep increasing, keep getting better. Bidding only gets better over time. And like I said, at this point in time, you're really hard-pressed to find a tribe that doesn't play black and give you this card as an option. So as I mentioned up top of this, similar to the other MH2 picks that I made, the expectation is that within the next few months, as population drops, this card will pick up in price, because we're done. No more MH2 print runs. We got it. Everything that's out there is out there. So TCG market and Buylists numbers have been flat for long enough that we can now begin to move in. My expectation for when we see the price increase on the open market, it's a little murky right now, as there are several vendors floating massive stock only cents apart, and they are like the low end of things. I expect once one of these vendors is bought out, we'll start to see a small amount of movement, but once a second one goes, that'll be the point of no return. And based on current movement, meaning sales per day, I would expect this to happen closer to 6 months out than 3, but a lot of that is dependent on what we see in Kamigawa in terms of tribes that can support playing this card. As far as reprint equity goes, I don't think we're ever going to see a reprint of this card directly into Standard, and I'll cite Haunting Voyage as the bellwether, showing WotC's desire to iterate on a quote-unquote controlled fashion rather than just reprint. So Haunting Voyage is just Patriarch's bidding for you if you foretell it. If you do not foretell it, you cast it for like 7, then you get 3 creatures back. So you need to foretell it, then pay the 5, and then you choose a creature type, and everything of the chosen type comes back, right? So that's controlled. It's not just a straight reprint. So this places bidding again in a supplemental product, and I do not think that another single printing in a master set dampens the trajectory of this card in the long run. I also doubt an EDH reprint would impact the price of this card at all, but if it was placed in an upcoming EDH product, I'd imagine that the deck is the one to target for financial gain solely based on this card, a la True Name Nemesis, a la Toxic Deluge, etc.
Yeah.
So overall, I think bidding just has nowhere to go but up right now, and I think this is the perfect time to buy in. As far as raw numbers were concerned, and listings look like I said, TCG player, the number in the market has decreased from 310 to about 230, but the prices dropped at the same time, as people are just kind of getting frustrated and dumping because these two large vendors were floating the price. There's one of them now has 80 copies left. The other one has 117. Yeah. 117 is at $1.80, by the way. So, like
$2.10ish to buy them all.
Yeah, the Gaming Co. Surprisingly, right? They have 117 left. That's on the second page of TCG Player, and the real MTG Kings have 80 left. These are the two that are just kind of blocking this price, and to make sales, people have had to go lower, right? So it just kind of depresses things. But it's that quantity reduction that I'm looking at. You know, that's like what? It's almost 30% of the quantity gone since June. CK, on the other hand, they were buying 350 in June at $1.05, but people have been eating away at it, and they've just slowly dropped their buy price to 45 cents, and they're now only buying in the high 180s, 188, because somebody sent them 6 in the last week. So this isn't really churning at the vendor level yet, because they are just flush from MH2 openings. So this really is a population thing, and once that goes, we're good. So we want to get out ahead of this. And I don't think this is a card that's going to go back up to 20 a la the original. I think it probably holds between 5 and 10. I think that's the perfect place for Patriarchs bidding. It should be there until the end of time, unless they come up with something better. But all said and told, that's where I want to be right now for the money.
I like this one because it reminds me of, this is the example I always use, Collected Company. The way Wizards is designing the game, this card will only be more desired, more needed, more sought after the longer the game exists. Because tribal synergies keep getting printed. Creatures keep getting more and more aggressive. That's just how it works. Yep. And that's, these are kind of like the evergreen blue chips almost at this point, where this is, this is a blue chip. I would say this qualifies. This is something I want to sit on forever. Awesome, sign me up. And that's why I think it's a solid pick, because even when it gets reprinted, sure, it takes a hit. But how many people at your local store have tribal decks? And how many tribal decks do they have? Yep. At one point, there was a guy who was the tribal guy. He literally even had a Minotaur and an enchantment tribal deck, by which I don't mean it was an enchantment deck. I mean it was the Theros enchantments that bestow and turn into dudes. They're all over the place. Oh, yeah. And it's got that universal casual curb appeal. It's very high impact, just a good, strong card. And I think it's super solid. I also think it's the kind of thing that you should just, as a backpacker, always have available. Yeah. You want some amount of these in with your smalls, because it's something that, look, I'll trade you $1.50 in buy list commons and uncommons for that card because TCG lows $1. Great. Send me all of your signets. Fine. Give me 6 Izzet signets for this card, and I'll make my money back. Yeah. I just think it's great.
Yeah. It's weird. It's like this card was unknown when it only had an Onslaught printing, and now it's just growing in popularity. It's not all over yet. It's still in a low population of decks compared to what it could be for a card that fits into so many tribes overall.
Yeah.
I think it's just a matter of time, and it really was that gatekeeping on the price of the Onslaught version that kept this card from popping up on Rex, and more than just so this is what Rex looks like. I'll show everybody. Iname, a spirit, is number 1. Then, dragons, elves, goblins, slivers, like I mentioned, grist. I don't know what you're doing there. I don't really care right now. Minotaurs, elves again, rats, more dragons. This is kind of a varied set of generals. What you don't see here is Gissa and Geralf, but you definitely see them represented under the new cards with some of the scabs. You're seeing this come in, and I think it's just, like I said, a matter of time for the mystique of this $30 card to really creep into rec. As a Slivers player, I've known about it. As a Goblin bidding player, I knew about it.
Goblin bidding, by the way, is way better now with Snoop.
Oh, yeah. But I mean, the reason I have Onslaught copies is because we jammed middle school in Vegas, and then I just picked them up from Star City.
Yep. Deck was great.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if I'll ever play it in that format, but I have my Onslaught ones, and I'm so happy that this was reprinted in Modern Horizons 2, because I do have a handful of tribal decks that could use that card, and I didn't want to keep shelling out $30 every time.
Yeah.
But man, did I shell out too.
Better believe it.
And I think that's where we are, and I think, just broadly speaking, before we head out over the next couple of months, I expect that we'll pick up on some more MH2 specs here and there, because there's still a lot of meat on the bone for this set, and there is going to come an inflection point. And I'm not going to keep slanting my picks that way. I think it's just going to kind of happen that eventually, like, stuff we've been watching, that people are just going to fall over and start reporting on and wreck all of a sudden. Like, boop, there it goes.
Yeah. I think that's how it goes with casual tribal cards, especially, or just casual blue chips like this, just casual staples. And it's also interesting to me because this is the kind of thing that is subject to fan exposure and eyes on it at literally any time, because tribal is such a universal theme. It doesn't have to center around a set release. It doesn't have to center around, a new block or a plane visit or anything like that. It literally just like someone decides, I want to make a degenerate elf deck and use goblin and use bidding it. Okay, well, Command Zone had 2 bidding decks on stream, and all of a sudden, everyone wants to build those decks. Everyone is on this card.
Exactly.
So.
I can tell you the people that know about these cards firsthand, same person, 2 different decks. Mono Shadowborn Apostle guy, mono Relentless Rats guy.
Yep. Definitely.
2 decks, same guy. They knew about this
Absolutely.
card.
Yeah, guaranteed. Yeah. You probably play with him.
I don't know if there are enough Shadowborn Apostles left in the state, like in my state, to make one of those decks. Definitely not Relentless Rats, but maybe we'll get to that in another episode if they bring the Rat Tribe back for Kamigawa. I don't think we've seen much in that regard yet, just some odds and ends. So
yeah,
I think that's what we'll call it for this week, though. So thanks for coming along, guys. We are at MtG Cabalcast on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and Patreon. Now you can find the audio podcast wherever you listen to your podcast that isn't the podcast app.
Yes.
We're everywhere, finally. I am at Halt I Am Reptar on Twitter. If you want to talk to me about the Sega Dreamcast, you are
at Thirsty
We'll see you
Sizzler.
next week.
Greatest console ever.
Absolutely. And
Deuces.
loudest.